So this is Saved by Grace Alone, Part 3. Are we set free from the law? The basis of the doctrine of hypergrace is that we have been set free from the requirements of the law. Jesus has fulfilled the requirements of the law for us. They maintain that from the moment of conversion, it is only God's grace that is at work in their lives. It is not God's plan that Christians suffer. It is not God's plan that they be persecuted or thrown in prison. They will not be here for the tribulation period, having been raptured out. Christians do not come under the laws of God, and therefore they do not come under God's judgment. If ever a Christian does come under judgment, then their blanket belief is that these were really not genuine Christians. One of the most prominent preachers of the hypergrace doctrine teaches that this is true of Ananias and Sapphira. They just weren't real Christians. To give an example, well, as Christians, are we indeed set free from the law? Well, I guess we need to first look at why did God give us the law? This is a quote from Bible.org. It's simple and it's clear. Okay, quote, "Have you ever noticed how prone you are to excuse yourself and blame others? This especially comes out when I'm driving. The driver who whizzed past me is a maniac. The granny in front of me holding up traffic by her slow driving is a road hazard. But me, hey, I drive just right. The guy who spends less than I do is a tightwad. The guy who spends more is irresponsible. But me, I'm a careful manager of what the Lord gives me." We chuckle at these examples, but if we go through life justifying ourselves and blaming others, the day will come when we won't be laughing. As we've seen in recent messages, the most difficult people to reach with the gospel are relatively good people, especially religious good people. They go to church, they are outwardly moral. They take pride in their good deeds. They think, sure, I've got my faults, who doesn't? But God knows that I am basically a good person. Criminals and terrorists may deserve hell, but I'm not like they are. Filled with self-righteousness, they trust in their good works to justify them on Judgment Day. They don't see their need for a saviour from sin, and so they never repent of their sins and trust in Jesus Christ. Unquote. Why did God give the law? The law was given to reveal God, and in doing so, it reveals our sin. The law of God is the perfect expression of God's will and character. It reveals who God is. When we hold our actions and character up and compare them to the actions and character of God, then we can clearly see how far short we fall. The law was given to show us how far we fall short of God's character. The trouble is, the legalists attempt to keep all the laws through their own strength, and they demand that everyone else should also. But the liberalists, which include the hypergrace supporters, do exactly the opposite. They do not hold themselves responsible for their shortfall, nor do they hold anyone else responsible. Both the legalists and the liberals interpret God's laws simply as a set of rules and regulations that God requires humans to fulfill. The legalists try to do just that. They try to fulfill all God's laws as a set of rules and regulations. But the liberalists do exactly the opposite. They refuse to keep any of God's laws. Later on, we'll be looking at the way we are supposed to navigate the laws of God. So if the law reveals God, what then is God's will and character? God is love. The following is a quote from BibleStudy.com. God is love. If we want the perfect example of love, it is in our Creator God. Often, God's love is referred to as agape love, which is the highest form of love that is selfless and sacrificial. It is steadfast, unchanging, and unconditional. Unquote. Okay, so if God is love and the law was given to show us how much we are not like Him, then the law is basically given to reveal to us how much we fail to love. So then you have the hypergrace doctrine that is absolutely permeating and advancing in Christianity that teaches that the law is fulfilled in Christ and we no longer have to be led by it. Well, the law certainly was fulfilled in Christ, in that He made the perfect sacrificial act of love for us and laid His life down for us. And we are called to do the same. Because in 1 John 3:16 it says, "By this we know love. Because He laid His life down for us, then we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren." Now, if you were to ask people, do you know how to love? What do you think they're going to say? Ask the hypergrace people, do you know how to love? Ask the atheists if they know how to love. Of course, everybody's answer is going to be yes, because they all think that they are moral. Now, this is the great atheist's argument against the existence of God. They say there is no God. If there was a God, then there wouldn't be all this suffering in the world. However, where their argument falls down is, if there is no God, which is their conclusion, then the source of suffering must be coming from somewhere else. And of course, that source is humanity. We are the source of the world's suffering. But the atheists don't then go on to say, wow, I'm responsible for suffering. I'd better do something about it. I need to change. No, no, no. The atheists say they don't need to change. They don't need God to teach them morality. They consider themselves moral. How dare Christians insinuate that they're not moral? They know how to love. It's someone else that's doing all the bad stuff. You know, they think they never hurt anyone. Now, this is just what we read above. They think, sure, I've got my faults, who doesn't? But I'm a basically good person. Criminals and terrorists may deserve punishment, but I'm not like they are. The hypergrace people are even worse than this because they just don't care whether their lack of love hurts people. That's not their consideration. Their focus is making sure that they are forgiven so that they can get to heaven and make sure it's before the world goes to hell, because the pre-tribulation doctrine goes hand in hand with the hypergrace doctrine. They have absolutely no intention of laying their lives down for anyone. In 1 John 4:7-8 it says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." Now, in same chapter, verses 16-17, God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. And in Galatians 5, verse 13-15, it says, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty, only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another." Now the thing is, Humanity is born in rebellion, and rebellion is selfish. So, you think you love? So, you think you're the exception? Maybe we should ask your spouse, or your children, or your parents, or your teachers, or your boss, or your employees, or your friends, or your fellow Christians. Let's see what the people around you would say. The thing is, we've been born in rebellion. We have been born with the fallen nature of Adam. Adam and Eve rebelled against God, but they also rebelled against each other. And Cain, humanity's first son, killed his brother out of jealousy. From the beginning, the Bible gives us story after story showing that human beings have lacked morality and love. Our desire to respond to our base emotions and to satisfy them is far greater than our desire to better the lives of those around us. The sad conclusion about humanity is that we are takers, not givers. Now we're going to look at evolutionary theory, to look at the historical evidence of human morality. Human nature is fundamentally selfish. That is the overwhelming findings of evolutionary theorists. These are the people who studied human behaviour. Human history reveals that humans have traditionally focused on competition and the ruthlessness of natural selection. We've all heard the saying, the survival of the fittest, that society has formed and created in order to survive the challenges humans have of dealing with this world we live in, with all its complexities such as famine, disease, wild beasts and wars. But unfortunately, history also reveals to us that what we do isn't just to survive. In our fallen, unloving state, we created a social stratification, one that was totally unnecessary for survival alone. When human beings want more, even when we have enough, we just take from the weakest ones. Now I'm going to put up here a graph, which is a good example of social stratification. The top you'll see the Pope, the Church, under that monarchs, under that nobles, knights, vassals, down merchants, farmers, craftsmen, down to peasants and serfs. Now, history shows that when monarchs or those in power at the top of the stratification, when they want more, they simply take it from the weaker members of society, those at the bottom. These are the ones that are least able to fight back because they have the least power. Those at the top of society have the most. They have the most of everything. More power, more money, more honour. They get the best house to live in, the best car to ride in, the best food to eat, the best clothes to wear, the best doctors to tend to their ills, the best food to eat. They sit in all the places of honour wherever they go. In other words, they not only take what they don't need, but they flaunt their power and wealth. And it doesn't matter how much they have, if they want more, they just take it. Now, a classic example of this in modernity, if you think this is only, centuries ago, tax cuts. Tax cuts usually benefit those who already have the most and reduces the income of those that have the least. They end up paying more tax and the wealthy pay less. As you go down the scale on each rung, the people have less and less, until at the bottom, these people have no power, little food, sometimes no shelter, so their survival rate is very low. In order to survive and keep their families safe, you have to climb the social ladder. Now, this is called social mobility. There was a time when the mobility was not fluid. You were mostly stuck in the class you were born into. But it was possible to climb the social ladder. It just usually involved despicable means. Now, to give you an example of this, daughters have often been sold off or married off to raise the economic level of a family. This still happens in many countries today, and often these girls who are little more than children will find themselves in slavery or in the sex trade. Now, in prosperous Western countries, where the vast majority of civilians have more than enough of everything and survival is not an issue, we still do this. We still climb the social ladder. The thing is, if it's not for survival, then why do we still do it? And the answer is because human nature is fundamentally selfish. Our conversations rotate around what we've achieved, our socio-economic achievements. We love to let others know what a success we're making of our lives. We love to let people know how successful our children are and how they're all at university or whatever. And we don't mind exaggerating either. And we love to flaunt our success with the labelled clothes we wear, the houses we live in, the bigger the better and the better the neighbourhood, the cars we drive and the people we hang out with. We do not invite the homeless to our dinner parties. No. No, we don't invite those who most need the food. No, we invite those who least need the food. Now, none of these things have anything to do with survival. They have everything to do with lust and idolatry. It's how the advertising agencies make their clients money, by appealing to our lusts and idols, not our survival. You don't see ads on TV appealing to the needs of homeless people. It's all stuff that mostly we don't need. And none of this has to do with assisting weaker members of our society to survive. We have proof over and over and over again that we as a society have no genuine interest in a level playing field for all people. There is plenty in the kitty to go around for everyone, but we are far more interested as a society in getting as much of that kitty for ourselves as we can. In fact, in recent years, statistics reveal that the poor are getting poorer, while middle-class families are growing in disposable income. We are choosing to not share that which we could easily do so without it having any effect whatsoever on our survival. Church is no different. It is a social stratification that people are trying to climb. The elite sit in the front row and rich pastors flaunt their success. The poor among us are not visible. They are the church's best kept secret, because these filthy rich pastors, even though they have more than enough, when they want more, they just take it from the vulnerable in the flock, those that least can fight back. The widow gives the ministry her last $10 in the hope that the lies that this ministry has promised will change her financial hardship. They are slick snake charmers selling rattlesnake poison and testifying that it will heal anything. Meanwhile, they fly in their private jets from one source of money to the next. Now, whether a socialist society is actually a good idea or not is not the question here, because that's a moot question, considering we live in an incredibly self-centered society. What the question here is, knowing all this that we've just discussed, do we really think that as humans we know how to love? Now, are humans capable of altruism? Of course we are. We have records of acts of great altruism. However, these are usually single acts. And we hand out medals as rewards for it because it's very rare. And even more rare for humans to live a life of altruism, meaning sacrificing their lives for the betterment of others. Now, a good example of this, of course, would be Mother Teresa. We all know Mother Teresa's ministry. Now, in fact, society often sees this as not normal. And we often fluctuate between considering these people heroes or eccentrics. Why? Because we wouldn't do it ourselves. Now 1 John 3:17 says, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? So what do you think? Does humanity know how to love? I guess the next question is can humans learn to love? Well, again, let's look at the evidence. And it's really, really easy to find that evidence. Is the world getting better or worse? Is poverty getting better or worse? Is the sex trade decreasing or increasing, especially since the use of TV, film and the internet? Is the nuclear world threat better or worse in our day? Do we live in a world that is at peace, or are we seemingly on the edge of war constantly? Terrorist attacks, are they stopping or increasing? Now, are humans reducing our consumption in order to save the planet's delicate environmental balance? Or is consumption increasing? We can't even claim a lack of education on this now. We either choose to do this or not. Hunger and famine in the world, is it stopping or increasing? Now, here's the interesting thing about this. The last 2 points I made are interconnected. The greed and consumption of wealthy first world countries is having an effect on the environment. Increased greenhouse gases are causing temperatures to rise in areas of the world where a 1% increase in temperature means drier conditions and grains won't grow. So our need for our Wagyu beef and our best cuts of steak that have absolutely nothing to do with survival means that another family will not get to eat enough this year. They may have to sell their daughter to raise the economic level of their family, and we consume with absolutely no care for that family at all. What about the clothes we wear? Did someone somewhere in the world have to suffer for it to be produced just so you could strut your stuff like a peacock? Or to leave it in the cupboard and never even get around to wearing it? So what do you think? Are we learning to be moral? There will always be a Cain that's going to kill Abel, just because Abel achieved something that Cain couldn't. We long to climb the social ladder, even though it's got nothing to do with survival. Now, God dealt with Adam when he sinned, and he dealt with Cain when he sinned. Why? Because God knows that when left uncontrolled, our behaviour becomes as Sodom and Gomorrah. So if sin is not controlled, it goes berserk. So societies recognised this very early, and the answer was to create controls. These controls were in the form of consequences. So we created laws that were to contain human bad behaviour, to stop humans from hurting one another. If we broke these laws, then there would be consequences. Anything from being locked away from society, supposedly until we learned to behave, or publicly shamed by being put in stocks in the public place, Some of us would have lost a limb. You know, if we stole, then our hand would have been cut off. Or if we murdered, we would pay with our life, etc., etc. Now, in modernity, we're creating a secular society where political correctness is eroding the civil laws. And in the church, hypergrace teaching is refusing to bow to the laws of God and excusing the sins of Christians before God, teaching that our past, present, and future sins are forgiven and there is nothing to get in the way of our going to heaven. God no longer judges us. According to the hypergrace people, Christians are not under judgment. God no longer deals with sin, and yet, funnily enough, the world is getting more and more like Sodom and Gomorrah, and the church isn't any different. This is why Jesus said there would be lawlessness in the last days. It wasn't just in the secular world he was talking about, it meant in the church as well. God judges the world, but it is Jesus that judges his church. And so because we've been given free will, it's up to us to choose to obey or not. And depending on which way we jump, we'll decide whether we are a sheep or a goat. During these times, Christians have been up in arms at over the fact that they believe the world's going to hell, and it's the secular world, according to them, that's causing it. Christians are trying to fight back through political means and having the laws that support Christian principles strengthened. But it's not working. They haven't bothered to stop and ask, why is God allowing his laws to be eroded? And I'll tell you why. Because it's separating the sheep from the goats. Who will love and who will use this as an excuse to satisfy their lusts and idolatry? Now, we can choose to fight for our place on the social stratification, or we can choose to lay our life down for others. In other words, we can choose to live selfishly and abusively or live a life of love. Now, if we choose to live a life of love for the betterment of others, how do we do this if we are born selfish, if we're born in rebellion, and if we can't learn to love? So let's go back to the beginning where we looked at why God gave the law. He gave the law to reveal who he was. Now, God is love. So when we hold ourselves up to the law, we see how much we fall short of God's nature in us. We see how much we do not love others. If you look at the Ten Commandments, you'll clearly see that God has required us to act with love towards others and to not be abusive and selfish and always taking from others. Now, the first 4 commandments relate to our response to God. The last 6 relate to our response to each other. If we relate to God with respect and honour, it will naturally flow into our relationships with other people. If we can't relate appropriately to God, who is our creator and the creator of all the universe, we certainly will not relate to others with any more respect than that. Now, is there any hope for humanity? If we're born with such a propensity to fall short of the loving character of God and we cannot keep the laws of God, can there be any hope for humanity? Well, of course there is. God says to us, be holy, for I am holy. So, do we seriously believe that we can become holy? Our answer to this is going to determine our path. Will we take the narrow road or the wide road? Now, if God calls us to be holy, then he's going to provide a way. And Jesus is that way. He's the author and finisher of our faith. We just have to believe that. We just need the kind of rare faith that believes that the work he has begun in us, he will continue to do. And it truly is a rare faith because most Christians don't believe in holiness. So they certainly aren't living a life of pursuing it. Now, we can choose to continue to be abusive and take whatever we need from others, or we can choose to pursue holiness. We cannot achieve holiness by keeping a set of rules and regulations. But still, this is what God requires from us. So how do we do this then? Well, to become holy requires great change in our lives. However, we cannot bring about that change in us. It is the sole work of God in our lives. We must genuinely and tenaciously invite that change and then surrender to the work of God in our lives on a daily basis. This is the refining fire. The refining fire is the key to becoming a moral and loving follower of God and fulfilling His laws. And this we will talk about in the next video. Just before I wrap up this video, I wanted to talk to you about something that you could get involved in if you're looking for a charity that does amazing work. Then I would like to present Destiny Rescue to you if you haven't heard of them. They are an amazing ministry working in mostly Asian countries, and they have an incredible success rate of bringing children out of sex slavery in those countries. So down below in the comments, I'll put a link to their website. So if you want to help set some young children free from this really, really despicable slavery, then this is the way to do it. Know that your money's being well spent. Thank you.